Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome the alumni and friends of the London School of Economics and the alums of the USC Department of Economics to our inaugural joint alumni event featuring our seminar to start this off, which I hope is first of many events to continue to develop the relationship between our two institutions. As USC sends several students to study abroad at the LSE, as well as participate in their graduate programs. I'm just curious, is there anyone else who is also both an LSE and a USC alum here? Okay, quite a few of you. So my name is Mathian Vai. I graduated from USC in 2015, and I studied abroad at the LSE in my junior year. Now I help both the AFLSE Los Angeles chapter as well as the Department of Economics with mentorship programs. And so the inspiration for this event was to adopt LSE's well-known program for hosting public lectures. And part of that was to expand the offerings that the department provides to its alumni to help engage with alumni, help them keep them informed with what's going on and what type of research professors are engaging in, as well as provide additional continuing education opportunities for them. And as part of this, this event really would not have been possible without the support of the Economics Leadership Council, particularly the chair of the ELC, Eric Zerbrug, who's been very helpful in this entire process, as well as the Department of Economics, Alice Holtzman, who I'm sure many of you have met, as well as Karina Chicas. And with that, I'd like to introduce the topic of our seminar, which is the economics of AI, challenges and opportunities, as well as our expert lecturer who will help guide us through this discussion. An internationally respected economist, Armand Rancière, brings a depth of experience in academia, international finance, and global partnerships. After receiving his PhD from New York University, he served as a senior economist with the International Monetary Fund. He returned to academia as vice chair of economics at the Paris School of Economics and was recruited to USC in 2018. A research fellow with the Center of Economic Policy Research and a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. He just completed a 4-year tenure as chair of our Department of Economics. I'd like you all to welcome Professor Armand Rancière.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to talk tonight. My voice might be a bit quaking, but it's fine. So I think this is, the idea was to kind of introduce the topics, but then to kind of foster a larger conversation. So I kind of structure my talk in two parts. One part, and I discuss a bit the challenge of AI for things that matters for economics, like economic growth, productivity, labor. That's the first part. And then after that, we got a few questions. And the second part, I try to explain using two research done, some by me and some by one of my colleagues, Thomas Chanet, how AI can be used for economic research. So that's kind of a two-part. It's kind of derived from a set of lectures we invited to give at UCLA in December. It's kind of a very short version of it, so we have time to discuss. So I think I will just discuss briefly where we are, what are the scenarios for the diffusion of AI, and then the economic opportunities and challenge for economic growth, for labor inequality, and technical change. And then the second part, after some question, will be on how do we use AI as a tool for economics, and I will give two examples. One on the effect of new sentiment based on my research, and one based on long history of techniques based on the research of Thomas Chanet. None of this research would have been possible without the tools of AI. So I'm just going back to some basic definition. Many of you should know that. So we have kind of 3 different steps in the way we think about AI. One is called narrow intelligence, which describes the current AI system that can accomplish tasks with a relatively narrow defined domain. But this domain is getting broader and better with the development of kind of foundation models. But some people believe it's still the beginning. You have two other frontiers. One frontier is called artificial general intelligence, some AI that will be able to perform all human cognitive tasks. Of course, we might never get there. It's up to debate. There is a lot of controversy on whether AI will reach that stage. And if we even reach that stage, we can even think in terms of artificial superintelligence, which will be one that would surpass human in any cognitive domain. Going back, we remember the stuff about chess, for instance. Chess was a case where initially the guy Kasparov was kind of fighting with Deep Blue, and he won some, lost some, and now we say, then after that I give up, it's over. So I think that's the idea you have to kind of have in mind. But the question is that, of course, is it AI starting to? So I think that's the idea will be. There are two paradigms. One paradigm is that the kind of task that AI can do is kind of bounded, and at some point we will have reached the maximum complexity. That's a task that humans are able to do. AI might be able to do them, and then it stops. Another scenario will be an unbounded scenario in which the fact that we have AI make us think to more tasks that initially AI is helping us to do, but also pushing that frontier of complexity. Okay. Again, we don't know, but clearly the AI, in this case, AI might overtake human intelligence to accomplish this task. In this other case, it's more complex because as AI develop, the type of task that we can do also kind of get more and more complex. So the process is a bit different. Okay. So there are kind of three scenarios. So one scenario is kind of, I would say, the historical scenario is compare AI to previous general purpose technology that were invented. Okay. So like steam engine or electricity. Okay. So it will automate a range of work tasks, but also create new opportunities for the affected workers. It will increase productivity, and it has the potential to uplift the workforce. Okay. So nothing said that we are not in this scenario today. We might diverge from it, but that's still a very plausible scenario. Another scenario with that we reach in 20 years, artificial general intelligence. So in 20 years, AI can match all cognitive capability of human. And in this case, it will turbocharge growth, but it will fundamentally disrupt the workforce. That's the second scenario I will consider. And the third scenario is a kind of an accelerated version of it. I think it's unrealistic, so I will see. Okay, so what's happening in both scenarios? So there is an effect on growth, an effect on labor, and precisely on wages. I believe the effect on growth depends really. Oops.
Oh, it came back. I think they're watching you.
Something I've been told, we never touch the screen. We say to every speaker, but we forget when it's our turn. So I think the prospect for growth really depends on how fast AI diffuse. That's pretty obvious. On the stuff on wages, it's a bit more tricky because if AI in the traditional way is starting to increase productivity of labor, the wage will also keep increasing. But if at some point it makes labor obsolete, at some point the wages will fall dramatically. And that's the scenario in which people are more concerned about. And so if you look in terms of the path of technological progress, so one scenario is called X neutral, so when it benefits equally to labor and capital. So in this case, the wage will go up. Another scenario, which I think has been discussed a lot in terms of robotics, for instance, is that it's a bias against labor. So the wage keep on going, but at a lower path than output and the return to capital. Another part, which is called labor saving progress, is that you basically end up making more and more labor obsolete, and then the wage kind of will have to adjust basically to stay in pace with the cost of AI. I will go back to that. Okay. So I think if you stay in the present, more than science fictions, there are some interesting examples you can consider. So for instance, there were this example of the call center, where people use AI, the call center, as a kind of an assistant to the 5,000 customer support agent. And then you measure the productivity, basically use AI as a kind of an assistant. So in this case, what we find is that productivity increased by 14% on average, but by 34% for novice and the low-skilled workers, and with relatively minimal impact on the experience of and high-skilled workers. So I think clearly what AI does here is not affecting all workers the same. Okay, so it somehow helps the best practice, the one that the more productive workers are doing, diffuse much faster down the experience curve. So somehow it can affect a lot the value of seniority, because now you're able to kind of use this kind of the memories of this task to be able to train the new workers much more rapidly. And then if you measure the subjective well-beings, it's improved customer sentiment, also increase employee satisfactions, retention, and workers learning. Okay. Okay. So if you look at the cognitive market, so the effect of a productivity boost in a given sectors on productivity is just equal to the size of the boost times the size of the sector. So if each generative AI makes cognitive workers on average 30% more productive over a decade or two, and if cognitive work makes 60% of all value added, then you will experience an 18% increase in the aggregate productivity and output that will spread over this period. Okay. But this is not the end of it. There is also the idea that this will also accelerate innovation and then generate future productivity growth. That's a scenario of pushing the frontier I mentioned before. The cognitive workers not only produce current output, but also invent new things, engage in discovery. Okay, so this includes R&D, but also the process of rolling out new innovation into a production. So in productivity growth was 2%, and the cognitive labor that underpin it is 20% more productive. This means that now productivity growth will rise at the 2.5% level. So before we talk about the level effect, now we talk about the growth effect. But in this case, after a decade, this increase in productivity growth would leave the economy 5% larger, and the growth would be compound further. Okay. So if the so if AI also improve AI itself, then of course this effect will be even more accelerated. So you have basically two scenarios. So one scenario is like the baseline scenario. One scenario in which for a while it allows us to be much more productive, but then the path of growth stays the same as before. Okay. So that's what we're going to do without AI. With AI, you might have a level effect. So we get transitory boost, but once the gains have been exhausted, then we are going at the same path as before. And the third case, if you're able to boost the process of innovation itself, then the growth rate will increase. And so you have both transitory boost, but then you keep on going at a faster pace in the scenario. So that's kind of the three potential scenarios. So the first one is really about shifting tasks and increasing productivity. The second one is about AI being able to generate more innovation and more productivity through innovation, including innovation to the AI engine itself. So now let's turn to labor, okay? And let's try to reflect a little bit on labor in the last, let's say, 40 years. Okay? So before AI, what we observe is the automation of routine tasks. Okay? So what does it mean? It means lower wage for unskilled workers due to technology and foreign competition, higher wage for skilled workers. So somehow the unskilled workers were substitute to automation capital, where the skilled workers were complement. human capital. So the first one saw their wage in relative terms stagnating, and the other one saw their wage going up. And you also see a fall in the labor share and an increase in wage inequality. So that's what have been described as the effect of automation in the times before AI. So we could, so what we start to see with AI is what I will call cognitive automation. So in this case, it will affect the high-skilled workers as well as the low-skilled workers, and it will generate a fall in all wages and the wage share of all works. Okay. So then now let's project ourselves a bit further. Okay. So as the income produced by this machine rise, the value of labor decline. But at some point, it became optimal to phase out work, beginning with the workers who have low wage productivity and low wage satisfactions, since they have a comparative advantage enjoying leisure. Okay, so that's interesting because it's stark contrast with all this kind of welfare program or workfare program, would like to actually force individual with low productivity to work. Okay, so but in this case, of course, you will need somehow to redistribute. So basic income will be necessary to avoid some form of mass misery when there are significant wage decline. Okay. But then the recipient could still engage in work for its own sake, as they enjoy amenities, the structure it provides, the purpose and meanings, and if it creates positive externalities such as social connections and political stability. So now I'm entering into much more kind of speculative scenario, I would say. So what are the concern for labor? The first is that technical progress will be labor saving. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, technical progress has benefited both capital and labor in roughly equal proportion. So that's a kind of the neutral technical progress, and that has given rise to large increase in real wages. If you look at the recent automation, you have more and more substitution of unskilled labor by a machine, and you start having a saving of labor in some segment of the labor market, and reducing real wages for the affected workers. Okay. So that's the first concern. The second concern, which is even more worrisome, is about that what I will call perfect substitutability of labor. Okay. The fact that machine may become perfect substitute for labor. Okay. So it has not been the case in the past. Throughout history, technical progress has made production more efficient, but human labor stay a critical input into production. Okay, so and that's exactly why this labor in production has led to increase in wages as machines make labor more productive. But if, by contrast, advanced AI can fully substitute for any type of human labor, then labor will no longer be essential. Okay, so the derivative of that, I will put a certain concept, it's a bit the same, is that labor became economically redundant. That's the price of machine that substitute for human labor will fall below the cost of human subsistence. So in some sense, there will be no point in having people working to compete with AI, because even if they are able to do that, AI machine will be so cheap that the wage it could command will be below subsistence. So in such a world, human could not longer survive based on earning pretty market wage. Okay, so work will become obsolete and will cease to play the central role that it currently plays in society. So that's a little bit from the most positive to the most green scenario for labor. Okay. Okay. I mean, there could still be some demand for human jobs. Consumer might have an interesting preference for human to perform certain services like lawmakings, like they would like to have a human that make a decision, like a judge, for instance. If you look at medicine, it's a bit less clear. I believe, let's suppose that you could move directly from a kind of MRI into a kind of a robotic-based surgery without the presence of a surgeon. And then there will be some discussion. Would I still like to have a surgeon supervise the process, but maybe the operating robotic machine will have more experience and then will surpass that of the surgeon. So, but you might still prefer to have a human in command even if it's not the most productive way. You also might want to keep human in control for some ethical reasons to control AI systems. But this type of works will probably not be enough to generate sufficient demand to maintain the current level of wages. Okay. So in this case, is it such a disaster? So I have kind of presented that in that way. But if you think about, we should remember that work is a mean to an end, not an end in itself. If technology could provide a decent standard of living without obligatory work, it could allow Americans to find new source of meaning and live more fulfilling life if they have, of course, the means to do it. Okay, and then it will be able for the economy to produce greater wealth with less human labor. So the boundary of the human labor will no longer apply, and if only a fraction of this wealth accrues to displaced workers, then it could make everyone better off by expanding the economy, even as it shrinks the portion of income going to human work. But of course, this requires some mechanism in terms of redistribution. So people have discussed universal basic income and some universal capital income. In some sense, there is a disconnect between the production of output and wealth and wages. So if you want to the gains from AI to be redistributed, they will need some form of redistribution. So that's the kind of, so another type of perspective will be that should we try to steer the AI technology so it benefits more workers. Okay, so how should we steer technical progress to think into account the distributive impact, between capital and labor? So if you see, for example, two innovations like Google Map, which using a kind of a GPS, which is like a public technology, and enable millions to earn income as driver. But now if you move to Google Waymo, those people could be actually driven out of the street, and that threatens millions of jobs. So whether we want to steer technology towards labor, maybe because we'd like to prefer pre-distribution versus redistribution, that is politically more difficult, or because work provides more than just access to wages. Okay, so works provide not only income but also monetary benefits, identity, meaning, status, social connection. So in that way, we need to think in the future of work even beyond the connection between labor and wage and income. So I will stop here for the first part. I might have been a bit provocative on purpose by pushing the scenario to its limit. If you want to have more information on that, so there is a great economist from a colleague of me called Anton Korinek from University of Virginia, and part of the first part of my talk was inspired by his work. He has recently testified on Congress on this. He's a former macroeconomist who became one of the leading economists of AI. And the important thing about him is that he tried to think about AI in a distinct form. Many economists, in fact, were looking at technical progress or utilization and applied all their tools to AI in a bit of a brute force. But Anton has thought about this more deeply. So maybe I should pause that and open the discussion, not only with me, but also between you.
So I have a question for you. So I'm a physician, okay, and so we had a presentation from a French chap who came from IBM to try and sell us that Watson could replace us, right? And he said, this AI, it is based on the entire medical literature, and therefore it is true. But actually, half the medical literature is pure bullshit. And so how good is AI at detecting bullshit?
So I think,
I venture to suggest that half of economics.
No, I think it's,
half of economics is bullshit.
So if you look into that, I think, and it's a discussion we had with Dan, actually, yesterday about that. So let's go take the example of medicine. So if we really look at, if you're able to, for instance, have a machine that is able to scan millions of MRIs, it will become better at detecting some lesions. I think that's relatively clear, I believe. Okay. If you
The common stuff, all right.
Yeah, the common stuff, or if
You're not interested in that. It's the one.
yeah, no, sure. But I'm starting from the stuff in which it's obvious what are the gains. Some form of basic surgeries is now done by robots, maybe by basically looking at the outcome.
Driven by a surgeon. It's not driven by a robot.
No, it's using a robot, but the robot is controlled by a surgeon. Yes, yes, perfect. But you could imagine a situation in which, for some basic surgery, the robots with all parameters can starting to work on its own. We can imagine that. Okay. But the question you pose is a different question. The question you pose is about, it's a question for generative AI, basically, which is how do we kind of extract knowledge from existing knowledge? And it's a big question because fundamentally knowledge is incremental. Okay, so it's by digesting existing knowledge that you came up with new ideas, and then you push a bit the frontier. From time to time, there's a complete change in paradigm, Einstein or Copernic, but that's not the way science progress. Progress is incremental. So you digest what things, you find some kind of empty cell in the matrix of knowledge that's not been explored, and you go there. So, but the question then, you need to make sure that the inputs, because otherwise garbage in, garbage out. So if the input that you have, even if it's in a peer-reviewed journal, is kind of
Particularly in peer-reviewed journals.
True. Then you have to have some discussion. So maybe Dan, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think the way I think about it from a tech perspective is, yeah, you need clean data, right? And so much time and effort is spent around cleaning data, and what you end up doing is filter on filter to make sure you get down to a trusted source, which I think impedes the rate of progress in the future, but it also starts to give you a cleaner signal for the next task or the next.
But it might feel cleaning data is called cheating.
I think you're actually asking a different question, because you're asking, can the AI be determinative if something is true or not, or if it's bullshit, right? And so I think if you look at what Ramon was just discussing, like in his very first few slides, in terms of definitionally, what do we have and what are we looking at? I think we have ANI right now, so artificial narrow intelligence. So if you can really narrowly define and keep within a very narrow box what questions you're asking and how you're asking those questions, it's actually pretty damn good. What you're asking is a different question, which is, I'm looking at a much broader set of information, and I want to know what's true and what's bullshit. And my personal view, we're nowhere close right now, although it depends on who you ask about getting to something of more of an AGI, put the ASI far in the future. But you're asking a question for a broad spectrum capability to look at things from a holistic standpoint. And maybe, and my estimation has always been, we'll get to AGI when you get a large number of iterative ANIs that are stitched together in a way that can more successfully question information, cross-reference it and say, is that really true? But we're a long ways off from there. But so I think your question isn't even something we can really ask of AI yet, because we're just got these narrow bands right now.
Yeah, I think also following up on Ray's point, it's managing the risk, right? And are you more concerned with false positives or false negatives?
Yeah.
And building with that Bayesian approach of making sure that we manage that risk one way or the other, but I think we do, at least initially, it needs to pick a side and take a path. You know, if it's cutting somebody open or trying to predict, you know, stock futures tomorrow.
I thought we'd get to the river and bays.
You can play lots of logic games and make Bayesian logic make very illogical things, right?
Yeah, so I think, and then there is, of course, the type of solution AI starting to come up with might not be the one you want. Okay, so there have been evidence, for instance, that in algorithmic tradings, that algorithmic trading. So you have all these hedge funds using algorithmic tradings, and they're starting to figure out that when they're starting to kind of collude, of course they can get momentum and they can make money. So a lot of outcome of this kind of algorithmic trading learning is that they're starting to learn that by doing collusions, they can actually. But then when they're starting doing collusion, it's not clear how you're going to be able to intervene into that. So you might find many solution in fact is to be able to get market power somehow. If it helps you getting a bit more market powers, then of course that might not be the solution you want to achieve. I think another thing is that I believe one thing, for instance, for which it's clearly over, it's like translations. Translation now, it's clear that the best translation engine are completely putting off business the translators. I mean, they might do other things. They might be used to train even more complex stuff. But I think that's a case in which really, yes, the labor has been kind of almost turned obsolete. In terms of producing, for instance, artistic content and things like that, we're starting to see some quite interesting stuff because generative AI and the way many writers write, it's not very different. There is many similarities in the stuff. I think what is a bit when you're starting to discuss all this hallucination of generative AIs, a lot is because I think the tech generation is ahead of the logical minds, of the logical engine. So are you able to? But it's not because it's not there, because it's not been put together yet. So you could have starting. So if you want to ask AI, ChatGPT to solve complex math problem, it will have a hard time because it will try to a little bit guess solution by putting together many articles and stuff like that. But that's not the way the logic works. It's going back to your question. But if you're able to put a strong kind of a logic engine, is able to produce proofs, and some people are working on that, then you can improve quite a lot. So maybe you will not be able to detect what's bullshit or not, but you'll be able to rebuild some of the basic proofs beyond some knowledge by really seeing what fits together in a causal way. We are not there yet. And then it also depends of what you talk about. I believe in terms of in social sciences, there is no laws, there is no invariance. So in this case, AI will hallucinate, but we also hallucinate because we shift from paradigm to paradigm. It's not physics. Economics is not physics. There is no invariant. I believe the gravity is the same everywhere. If you look at economics as a discipline, there is fates. Now we move to behavioral economics. Now people criticize it. So it's like that. Okay, so it's different shifting between paradigm, and then for that, I believe you never converge. So in some sense, the point of the truth of the invariance, it's there in many sciences, social sciences, but also some of the natural sciences as well. Yes.
Regarding the future of economics as a field, do you see more focus on normative economics, which is prescriptive, compared to positive economics, which is descriptive? And how does AI ethics and morality work from within the AI? You could tell AI, look into a Rawlsian distribution. What creates a distribution that's Rawlsian? But what kind of ethical system does an AI create as it gets more and more advanced?
Yeah, so I think it's a question that goes beyond AI in a way. It's a question about I'm teaching that in my economics and philosophy class. It's about what value do we put on the consequence of some policies versus the actual process that it's. So if you always kind of give this example in my class about behavioral economics. So let's suppose three cases. One case is that you get mugged in the street by a beggar, and the beggar took $10, or by a thief, the guy took $10 out of your pocket and went away. Point number two. The point number two is that you meet the same guy and you give him $10 directly. Case number three, the mayor of LA takes $10 and basically we turn $10 to the same guys. From the point of view of the consequence, that's the same. Your $10 is less of a use for you than it is for the guy with the thief. But of course, all the process matters a lot. The freedom, the property rights, the right to taxation. So in some sense, you need to put back some more philosophy into it. So for instance, some people have discussed. So when you do what you could do with AI, you could do many very complex experiments, and then you can look at the average outcome. But you need to go back and see whether the process respects the fundamental freedom of this decision to enter into that. Because if you go back to the key paradigm, the liberal paradigm is not only about whether the outcome is efficient, if whether it's designed to protect your free will and your freedom. And that's, AI will not guarantee you that.
So the way AI functions currently, it's very results focused.
Yeah, but that's not only AI, it's the entire field of economics. Economics see themselves as plumber. They try. One of the women who got a Nobel Prize a few years ago is Esther Duflo. It's a French woman in Banerjee. They use randomized control trials over the world. So they give, in some village, they give mosquito nets, in some other villages, send mosquito net, and they see what works best. And so in all these things, you look at the average outcome, and then you decide to scale up those policies, but to not necessarily discuss whether this policy respect the freedom of individuals. So those policies, so in some sense, it has a kind of a paternalistic flavor. But that's true for the so AI make that, scale that up. But the problem already exists before, the disconnect between economics and philosophy somehow. Yes.
I'm glad you took it back towards value judgments. I want to thank you for your presentation. First of all, this is a lot of, to me, this issue is so polemical, and you've kind of managed to look at it in an objective way, which is very enlightening. But I think it's important to also go back to the polemics. There's a political economy of AI, which may not make a difference over the long term, but certainly in how it plays out now, in months and years to come, is very, very important, I think. The companies that are doing this are very big, wealthy companies, Google, Microsoft, et cetera. And especially in a political system which has become much more open, unfortunately, in recent decades to greater influence for wealth, they're throwing an enormous amount of weight around. And that I think, is affecting the way these things are adopted. On the way over here, I was actually listening on public radio there's a lot of resistance in San Francisco and now Los Angeles to the introduction of driverless vehicles, taxis, and I guess now trucks. And they had on the show all these labor representatives from San Francisco saying, based on real world experience, that the AI companies say that electronic driving, self-driving is safe. Well, they just recounted case after case of real world circumstances. These vehicles can't back up. San Francisco is a crowded city. Sometimes the whole system shuts down. But the companies are saying, that doesn't exist or it doesn't matter. And the public doesn't have any data. What they're pushing is a bill that would force these companies to report more of this information on problems and accidents and so forth with their technology. But the point is we don't have that now because they control And they're resisting this legislation through campaign donations. And so far they've been successful. So that whole side of it, I think you're not mentioning.
But I think the question, I go back to that, is in my view, you should not base a critique on the fact that there is not enough data or the process, the data is kind of flawed, because eventually the process will improve. And eventually the process will get
Drivers in the end will get as smart as
it will get better. So, but you might want to do a couple of fundamental critiques. I mean, one big debate in the economic history was between Hayek and Oscar Long, and of course people discuss about the value of prices in markets. Whether there are prices in market, prices are revealing information in a very efficient way. So that's why central plan economics have hard time, because they don't generate those prices and they don't get these price signals. Because Hayek said, okay, but at some point we will have all this information for this price signal, and maybe a central plan economy will be better. But again, Hayek said that's not the way you should think about it. No, because we not only generate these prices, but also we do it through voluntary exchange. So in this case, you can still make a decision about what type of standard you want to impose on the self-driving car. You can still control at some point when you authorize this product. You can still look at when it will generate an excess concentration and basically exclude some people from mobility. There are costs to do that. There are costs to put value judgment in the process. And so there is a book that's coming up called The Price of Values. Okay. So it's a book that described by two French authors. One is Augustin Lambier and the other one is David Tesma. And so economists, since Adam Smith, are all about efficiencies. They don't care about value. And they will say, oh, if there is gain for trade, we should open to trade. Okay. But then we should maybe control as well as the gain for trade, which was at the cost of maybe destroying some communities and things like that. So it's starting to flip back and say, okay, so are you willing to, for instance, pay more to make sure that your shirt has not been made by slave labor? But how much more? Okay, so if I tell you maybe you are willing to pay $5 or $10, but it's like $200 just to make sure that your shirt has been done by slave labor, you might give up on that. So again, there are some trade-offs. We might want to put judgment and value in this process, but up to a certain cost. And I think that's been driven a little bit the way we eventually authorize innovation. But of course, if the process of decision is driven by lobbies, then of course it became more complex to have this computation, because some people wait more than others. Yes.
So a lot of the labor concerns that you outlined are the same labor concerns that were raised back in the Industrial Revolution, as you point out, like people getting displaced, losing jobs. At the same time, or just what you point out just now, people are still having the same concerns. At the same time, technology also take away all of these less enjoyable tasks more and more. So, like tedious tasks like we just file taxes, all these accounting work can be done by AI, and who give tax
But it could be done by the government itself. And so France, when you get your tax return, it's pre-filled.
Exactly. So they're the same concern. At the same time, human don't seem to have, society don't seem to have issue finding work, like 100 years ago.
But so that's exactly the question, is whether this paradigm will remain or not. So that's a question I try to ask. So this paradigm in which there are some productivity gains, and the workers that are no longer required from industry go to some different industries. Eventually, initially, their wage are lower, but they can eventually upgrade their skills to different industry, and their wage will be higher. But it's not guarantees. It happened. It has happened for 200 years. The example, for instance, if some economists from San Diego look at the effect of trade openness in Brazil, there have been some displaced workers, and after 10 years, 15 years, they haven't found back jobs that pay similar wages before trade liberalization, even in growing economy. Okay, so it's not guaranteed that you will be able to go back to the same standard of living that you have in your previous job. It has happened with your progress. And then, that I discussed before, there are some jobs that people will value some human touch of it, like all the care industry, for instance. But they could also be robots that understand feelings, potentially. So we don't know. So then it will be a kind of, it could be a kind of a choice to decide it in some industries whether we want to replace nurses by kind of robots that seems to have the same empathy in some case than nurses. So I think it's potentially a different paradigm where so people will still be able to enjoy life. That's for sure. There are many meaningful ways of living, and if there are some mechanism to redistribute incomes, to rebate some of the gains to everyone, that might work well. But that still need to be invented, yes.
I think it's very interesting for Los Angeles. There might be a new focus on things like show business, the arts, and the humanities. It'd be interesting if it created this new paradigm of this like new Athens, and greater Los Angeles can capitalize in this new thing. And like an original painting's typically worth a lot more than a lithograph. There's something in the human nature where if it's handmade or made by the artist, there's something beautiful.
As long as you can afford it, in a way. So if you, I didn't mention it in my slide, I have it in my longer slide. So imagine that basically the worst case will say that, there is no task that you can, for decent wage, do as well as AI. Okay. So in this case, but some tasks might actually survive a long time. Look at the plumber in your house. As long as the house has not been standardized, it's useless to have a robot because each house is different. The guy will have to find where so in this case, the plumber might survive quite long to the development of AI. Maybe at some point it will be survived. So, Lucia, please.
Sorry, I didn't get to ask my question. So,
Oh, yes. Please.
So because I saw, on your slide, it sounds to me that core of the issue here is how do you either pre-distribute or redistribute,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So based on your observation and our past experiences, what do you think is the best economic policy moving forward to address these labor concerns?
Yeah, so I think there is not that much guidance in fundamental economics about that. If you look at the welfare theorem that you might have learned here at USC some time ago, it say, either you let the market works without any redistribution, and then you reach an equilibrium, and this here might happen with a lot of inequality, or you might redistribute ex ante, and then you can let people trade the market, and you will reach a different equilibrium, the different level of inequality. This is very abstract result without. So I think the economists will always say that it's always better to do cash transfer than to basically keep some workers in some activities that are less productive that they will be with other things, other way to generate income. So I think the key is to starting to have a conversation about this kind of a universal basic income. So before it was a conversation really on people that care about social justice, about reducing inequality, about changing distribution. Okay, so they started to think about that. But I think if you believe that AI will really displace permanently a lot of workers, then the question about universal basic income will starting to be of interest for even countries like the US that have a little preference for distribution. That's my sense.
Quick question on so I know if you look at the A16Z, they're probably more on the kind of high end of like AI will replace everything. They're invested in lots of companies. They're like, I think Mark recently published a paper, AI will eat the world. Just kind of curious, the counter argument that he always talks about how, you know, in any kind of technological innovation, more jobs are created than lost. So I'm just curious, kind of longer term studies of like kind of major technological changes like the textile creation and like industrial revolution, just and like looking at like what will ultimately happen with jobs and, like, and over what period, like obviously because AI is quite like rapidly developing, some of those prior technologies must have happened over longer periods of time and just that kind of impact on those things.
Yeah, but I think it all depends on whether the production functions need some capital and labor. Okay. So as long as you have capital and labor, maybe you have less needs of laborers, maybe you need more skills labor, maybe you need less unskilled labor. But as long as you have a production function that have both capital and labor, somehow labor will benefit from it to some extent. Some more than others, because productivity gains that you obtain will actually apply to both. The question is when you're starting to be able, when the optimal labor in every production function is actually zero. Okay. You start producing only with capital. So that's, and again, I believe we are not there yet. And the scenario of AI being similar to other technologies, it's still a possible scenario. It's still possible. But I think we need to think about the alternative scenarios from now. We should anticipate a little bit and then ask the question of distribution at each way. So that's just my point. But I don't have an answer and I'm not kind of forecast.
Sorry, a follow-on question kind of related is kind of open source AI versus kind of large corporations controlling the models. Curious, kind of looked at that just because obviously open source could probably enable lots of kind of entrepreneurship, kind of job creation in that sense. And I think a lot, you're getting a lot of like future company will be 2 employees with like AI agents kind of running a lot of things. So in that sense, it can kind of enable job creation, entrepreneurship, and that's another kind of thing.
I think, in my view, the paradigm about competition and innovation is still the same. It's kind of an inverted U-curve. Okay, so if you you cannot go to perfect competition because people get no wins for innovations. And then basically you don't give people incentive to kind of innovate. But if you give people like a 200 years patents, that's not good enough. So you should find always this balance between innovation. I don't think that changed with AI. I think that's still dangerous. You need to get people high wins to innovate. And eventually this trend should be able to be contested at some point. You can imagine changing a bit the regime of property rights.
Copyright even.
Yeah, or the copyrights to take into account. I think that. So we have we have a new program at USC. It's called a Master in Innovation Economics, Law and Regulation between Econ and the Law School. That looks precisely into that. I wonder whether I should give you a few minutes on the AI as tools. I will give you one example. Is it okay with you? Yes. Okay. I will skip the one that about my own research, but I will talk about the research done by one of my colleagues here, and I can explain it to you in a relatively Yes. So it's a paper by Thomas Chanet, when he has this vast ambition to look at the diffusion of technology across time and space over the last 5,000 years. Very modest. And he will, and for that, maybe I should just explain to you what he does. Okay. So what he does is to say, okay, so if I want, it's a big issue. So when does our technology evolved in different parts of the world, different point in times, where the shift take place? And we know something. We know that many things started in the Mesopotamia and then eventually shifted to Europe, but we don't have a clear measure presentation of that. So what he did is that he swallowed all the collection of the major museum in the world, the British Museum, the Metropolitan Museum in New York, the Louvre, the Museum of Cairo. So you get all the collections of all the objects that were produced. That's fine, but once you are there, you're kind of stuck because everyone kind of record. It's not like in the library when you have all this classification that is universal. There is no universal classification about objects in museums. So you're starting to have things that you cannot compare. So and then you got this brilliant idea. So there are some people at the Getty Foundation, some archaeologists. They're starting to create a kind of a glossary. How to describe an object. So you have like a spoon in tin used to make the soup, something like that. Okay, so like for each object, you have 7 or 8 characteristics that describe the object, the techniques to produce it, the usage of it, etc. But of course, the main task was to map. It's called entity-to-entity linking. Is to map all this collection from all the museums, very, very different, into a single glossary. And for that, they use an AI techniques, large language model, but they have to train them on their collection. They cannot, because most of the existing large language are trained on Wikipedia. Wikipedia will be useless for that. So that's also both the issue that when you take off the shelf the large language model, they've been trained on corpus that might be totally relevant for you. For them, Wikipedia was completely useless because Wikipedia never care about the similar type of issues. And they manage, and I think at the end, the outcome is a beautiful map. Let me show you the map. Which is all the, so they take 2.5 million objects for 26 language museum, and they did the classification using this entity-to-entity linking system. And then a cycle corresponds to the date where the objects are done. And so blue is the Neolithics, purple the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age, pink the Classical Antiquity, red the Middle Age, yellow the Renaissance, and they project that on the map of the world. Here you have the Arabic Peninsula, here you have Mesopotamia, here you have India, and then you have France and Italy, and you see it's incredible. You see the innovations, of new objects starting to shift from Mesopotamia to Europe over kind of 5,000 years. So that's this type of map that seems to be obvious, but without specifically trained large language model, the end-to-end antiquity linking systems, you will not be able to do that. And they use some tool they're starting to develop that, I think, with engineer from Facebook. That's an example of what you can do. And now he's doing something interesting. He looks at specific objects, which are the coins. And he has information on the coins, and he's able to see how the coins were moving. And from the coins, he's able to reproduce trade flows between the different things. So that's Thomas Chanet is one of the most creative researchers, and it's quite amazing. Yeah. Okay, so we can talk a bit more if you want. Well, yes.
So I had a question, just your general feelings on this, kind of going off of what both of you said. The idea of, freeing us up to do things that are more pleasant. So it seems like in some realms, you almost have this, separate reality of agents developing things or creating content that's then read and interpreted by other agents for less than productive purposes, right? And no different than a typical office, I guess, where there's a lot going on that's not really producing much, but there's an incredible amount of energy intensity into that. I heard, I don't know that this is true, you probably know better, but I heard that the amount of energy it takes for like GPT to generate 10 images is close to what it takes to charge your phone. So on the energy intensity side of it, and then the other side is on a lot of the content that's created. So let's say people are using AI to find new ways of generating an income, like creating videos. There seems to be this influx, and this is tough to control for a lot of it's human created or directed. But there's so much content on YouTube that is just false, but it is pitched as an educational video, right? Like there was one about, and it seems like the same voice or two is narrating all of them. But there was a video on Volkswagen's production processes. And this is where they're making tires. Volkswagen doesn't make tires, there's a pneumatic suspension device, but it looked round. So as far as AI then looking at things that were created perhaps falsely or without much oversight by someone who can fact check it, is that run the risk then of becoming in the data set that it's saying, oh, yep, that makes sense?
Yeah, so I believe it's the ability to generate false information became kind of exponential. And then since our mind has kind of so you will need somehow some AI engine to undo the evil of other. But in a way, it's a little bit. When people live in autarchic regime and they have propaganda, you have other people that try to unravel the propaganda. In some sense, this war will be done with some kind of vicious versus virtuous AI. So the manipulation of information is not new, the capability of doing that, but you could imagine that there will be some virtuous agents that will fight against the vicious agents. So in some sense, there are this fake advertising, I think, that goes away on Instagram when this famous actress were heard kind of saying that she will give for free some Le Creuset stuff. This stuff about Le Creuset. So this kind of French cooking device. And they were this famous actress, I forget the name. So, and it runs for weeks. It runs for weeks. People were probably saying it's a scam. It can still run for weeks. So I think there was a quote of Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman said, you can fool. I think I say you can fool everyone for a short period of time. You can fool some people for a very long amount of time, but you cannot fool everyone for a very long amount of time. So I think this is still the issue we are facing. Maybe some other people wants to chip in on this.
So going back to the media, for me, I think about, what's the end goal there, right? So is somebody trying to generate revenue? Is Instagram trying to drive engagement? If you follow that lead, right, I think that will eventually trim those things away. And going back to a lot of things that Ramon said, right? What's the end goal here? Are we trying to automate ourselves out of everything? There are other limiting factors like hardware, right, and bandwidth and 5G, and we can't necessarily have robots doing all the surgeries because there isn't enough bandwidth getting to that hospital to make all of those decisions, right, in split-second timing. So there are other limiting factors that, for better or worse, are probably going to slow this down a bit.
With litigation.
Right.
In your personal view, what are some of the biggest risks and opportunities you foresee on the AI roadmap? And are there particular variables or milestones we should be aware of as we approach those?
No, I think the only thing so I've been working on inequality and macro. So when I started to work on that, I started to uncover, for instance, that if you look at the big financial crisis in the US, the 1929 and the 2007, all of them have been preceded by some large widening in inequality, and with a lot of kind of saving gluts on top and excess borrowing at the bottom, and then eventually they end up where. So when I was doing this research, I said, even if you don't care about inequality and redistributions, this will have impact to macroeconomic stability. So I think that's the other things. Maybe we should think about in terms of AI. So even if we have no test for redistribution, so if we believe there is no reason to redistribute, the technical evolution and stability politically of it might force us to starting to develop new tools for forward distribution. So I think that's the thing I would take home from my perspective. And it's and I think it's relatively new because people have some preference for distribution, and well, let's vote and let's see what's happened. But in fact, there are some cases in which where you might want not to do any distribution, but you might be forced to do it. Otherwise, you might have part of people in misery that takes over. I mean, it's possible. So I think
Like in France.
It's almost happened. It's almost happened.
We start with the Rue Quincampoix. We invent the stock exchange. We have the Rue
Yeah, but if you
Quincampoix.
look at the Yellow Jacket, it was closed.
And now in France, you have professors underpaid, and you have people on state guaranteed income, and then you got the farmers driving their tractors around Paris. So it's
No. So at some point, I mean, there are many examples where at some point people who are losing for this evolution will say, okay, I'm losing. I'm not going to wait until I might win
Don't put up with
again.
this anymore.
And and yes.
Could you go through your news sentiment index slides?
Yeah, so I think I can go into that. So I can explain to you. So basically what we did is that again, so we take all the corpus of Reuters news through Factiva. Okay. And so we have a very simple natural process language NPL engines, and we just characterize each article to its tonality, whether it was optimistic or pessimistic. So this kind of tonality of the news will be what we call the sentiments. And then the question is that whether there are some information present in that news sentiment that will predict, that will basically have impact on either stock, asset prices or capital flows, even if we control for all the hard information. We have the announcement, the economic figures, stuff like that. It turns to have some impact, and especially they have some kind of global news sentiments shock that tend to drive prices and flows for quite a long time, especially through the kind of the global investors. So for some people, then we are kind of stuck. What is it? Is it like animal spirit? Is it the fact that there are some information there that appears first as new sentiments before being reflected into hard numbers? But I think then we have done that from research perspective. But if you look at BlackRock, there are hundreds of people that reading stuff all the times and trying to decode and to find some signal. Or they read all the minutes of the Fed and stuff like that. It became like an industry of using this NPL to predict asset prices. The question is how to interpret it, how to make sense of it, how to have a kind of how to move away from prediction to understand the causality of it. That's much more challenging. And the industry doesn't care much. If you generate alpha and predictability, how it happens, what the mechanism, they don't care. But that's where we are still relevant as social scientists, because we try to interpret and understand this type of things, if we can.
Well, I just want to thank you for this. It's been very stimulating.
Thank you for
Very
attending,
enjoyable.
and it was a pleasure to see you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you're all welcome to hang out and continue the discussion. We have refreshments in the lounge. We thank both the alums with AFLSC and USC's Department of Economics for joining us